Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine starting with just absolutely crushing loss, facing odds that seem totally impossible,
Yeah.
being forced out of where you felt you were meant to be, feeling complete despair,
Right.
and then somehow witnessing this like explosion of growth, a movement reaching millions in just a few years. It sounds almost unbelievable.
It really does.
So today we're taking a deep dive into the story and the principles behind something called contagious disciple-making.
And to do that, we're looking directly at the source material you shared with us, specifically a bunch of endorsements for the book Contagious Disciple-Making by David L. Watson and his son, Paul D. Watson.
Right, and also the author's own introduction to that book.
Yeah, exactly. So we get both the outside view, what others are saying, and the inside story, the origin from the authors themselves.
So we get the validation and the context, why others think it's a big deal, and how the Watsons say it all started.
Our mission here is really to pull out the most important nuggets from these sources for you. We want to understand this incredible journey they describe.
From despair to multiplication.
Right. And grasp the core ideas and see why, according to these accounts, they seem to have led to such, well, astonishing results.
What are the key takeaways for you, the listener, from this whole story?
Exactly.
Okay. This journey sounds, intense, challenging, but ultimately, the scale of success described is huge. Let's jump in.
Let's do it.
First up, let's look at what others are saying, the endorsements. What kind of picture do they paint? What are the common threads?
Well, the language they use is pretty strong. It suggests this isn't just, another method or book. Several themes really pop out.
Yeah, I notice it's constantly called practical, definitely biblical, but also really challenging to how things are normally done in churches.
And the focus isn't just adding individuals. It's all about movements and multiplication.
Yeah.
They use words like viral, explosive multiplication.
That phrase explosive multiplication comes up a lot.
It does. And some even suggest it has the potential of fulfilling Christ's command, which is, a massive claim.
It really is. And several mention how it forces you to challenge, maybe even deconstruct existing models or theologies.
Right. That one endorsement from Roy Moran talks about being ruthlessly prodded to deculturize his Bible reading and dismantle errant ways.
Which suggests this isn't just tweaking things. It's about seeing things with completely new eyes.
Yeah, a fundamental shift. And what's also clear from these endorsements is that this isn't just theory cooked up somewhere.
No, they stress it comes from intense, real-world experience and training, from people who've actually seen it work on the ground.
And they highlight how it shows how just ordinary believers, not just the professionals, can become disciple makers who make more disciple makers.
Leading to extraordinary things, as they put it, even radical transformation, personally and globally.
And to give you a sense of the scale they're talking about, there's some really specific examples cited.
Like Jerry Trousdale mentioning David Watson catalyzing more than 60 of these disciple-making movements around the world.
60.
60 separate movements. And Eric Fish calls it the best work I've seen on these viral movements. He even says it's a seismic shift the Western church needs. Bold language.
Very bold.
Yeah.
And that example from David Parrish in Honduras, that one really stuck with me.
Yeah, that one's pretty wild.
He says they taught these principles to a small team, maybe 25 small groups initially, and those 25 groups exploded into about 700 groups and churches, reaching thousands of new obedient disciples.
That makes the whole explosive multiplication idea feel very real, doesn't it?
It does, and Stan Parks adds that interesting point that it shows disciple-making is both easy, like anyone can do it, but also hard because it demands deep change in us.
So putting it all together, the endorsements paint a picture of an approach that's, well, challenging, maybe disruptive, but promises incredible multiplicative results.
And it's grounded in experience, accessible to ordinary people. It definitely sets a high bar for the origin story. It does. It creates this real tension between the hype and the hope in the incredibly difficult place where David Watson says it all began.
Okay, those endorsements are powerful. Let's dive into that origin story now, straight from David Watson in the introduction. It starts somewhere really dark.
Absolutely. He talks about hitting rock bottom after 6 men he was working with were martyred. He told God, essentially, I can't do this anymore. I didn't sign up to get people killed.
That's devastating. And on top of that, he'd been kicked out of India, physically separated by, more than 2,500 miles and an ocean from the Bhojpuri people he felt called to reach.
And the sheer scale of that task among the Bhojpuris. It was just immense. You're talking 80 million people in an area they called the graveyard of missions,
The graveyard of missions, wow.
with, at the time, only about 27 evangelical churches and maybe fewer than 1,000 believers total. Overwhelming odds.
So, faced with all that, his personal struggle was, well, profound. He admits he begged God every day for 2 months to just take the calling away, let him go into business in the U.S.
I mean, can you imagine that level of despair, just
Yeah.
wanting out completely?
Yeah, it sounds like the absolute end of the road.
And that seems to be where the turning point happened. He describes making this covenant with God, basically challenging him.
How so?
He said, "You have to teach me how to plant churches. Show me in your word how you want me to reach these people. If you show me, I will do it." Like throwing down a gauntlet.
And he says God met the challenge.
He says God upheld his part. Over the next year, wrestling with the Bible, God started highlighting things, stuff he'd read before but never seen quite like this.
So patterns started emerging. New ideas about church, discipleship, planting churches.
Exactly. Patterns emerged and new thoughts came to life. The source insists these weren't just invented ideas, but things rediscovered in Scripture because of that desperate need.
They return to biblical patterns, as they call it. Okay, so he has these new ideas. Now he needs a team, right?
Right. He prayed for 5 Indian men to join him.
And he shared these ideas at this secret forum, and apparently most people thought he was nuts.
Yeah, thought he was crazy, he says, and just left.
Oh, man.
But one man stayed, believed in it, became the first team member. 3 others joined over the next year, still needed 1 more.
And the 5th was the surprise, wasn't it?
Totally unexpected. Instead of the man he was praying for, he gets a letter from a woman he doesn't even know. She felt God told her to become his disciple.
And she became the 5th team member.
She did. It really underscores how, in this story, things often happen in unexpected ways.
Okay, but here's a crucial part, I think. Even with the ideas and the team, it wasn't instant success, right?
Not at all. That's really important. They struggled, he says, for the next few years, just trying to implement these concepts.
And he mentions the first church planted using this new approach didn't even happen until 2 years after that secret forum.
2 years after the big insight. It feels counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It really does. What was going on during that time? The sources mention pressure.
Oh, huge pressure. He says his own mission organization threatened to fire me each year during my annual review.
Wow. Why?
They told him flat out, "You're not doing your job." Basically not meeting the traditional metrics, you know?
The pressure must have been incredible. How did he respond?
He just kept asking for more time. "Give me time. We're trying something new. Trust me." And he adds, for some reason they did.
That persistence through the slow start and the criticism,
Yeah,
that seems key.
absolutely crucial. Because then comes the explosion.
Yeah, the numbers he shares are just mind-blowing. He says all of a sudden the growth kicked in.
Listen to this year-by-year count of new churches planted. First year, 8. Okay. Next year, 48. Then 148, then 327, then 500.
And then the 5th year.
In the 5th year, we saw more than 1,000 new churches planted.
1,000 churches in 1 year. I can see why his organization was skeptical.
Totally. They called him up saying, "You must be mistaken. No one can plant 1,000 churches in 1 year." They just couldn't believe it.
But they checked it out.
They sent people to see, conducted a formal survey, and guess what? The team had actually underreported the numbers.
Unreal.
By 2008, not that long after the growth really took off, another survey found 80,000 churches planted and 2 million people baptized among the Bhojpuri.
80,000 churches, 2 million people. It really was exploding, as he puts it.
And it's significant, too, that by 2004, the work in India was entirely indigenously led. It didn't need him anymore. It wasn't about foreign dependence.
Which seems like a core principle, maybe, and then this thing expands globally.
Yeah, he partners with City Team, an organization with a long history, 50-plus years, helping homeless and addicted people. They wanted to use these DMM principles in extreme circumstances.
And he started in Africa.
A pilot project in Sierra Leone grew to 33 African nations. And at the time the intro was written, just 9 years in, their African teams had started nearly 27,000 churches.
26,911 churches. And baptized over 930,000 people.
Incredible numbers, again. And it expanded in the U.S. and the Americas, too. City Team kept using it with homeless and addicted folks in the States.
Starting over 1,200 discovery groups in 14 states.
And then it spread, kind of organically through relational lines, into Central and South America. Another 600-plus discovery groups and 25 churches in 12 countries.
So David's journey is just this arc of like intense struggle, clinging to these rediscovered ideas, facing down pressure, and then boom, explosive, self-sustaining, adaptable growth.
It really highlights how that exponential curve can follow a long, flat period of difficulty and the importance of empowering local people.
Now, David co-authored this book with his son Paul, and Paul's story is quite different, right? Offers another angle.
Yeah, Paul's very upfront about his path. He says he never intended to plant churches like my father does. He even questioned being in ministry after a brief and unsuccessful attempt as a youth minister.
So he kind of wandered a bit, business, other things.
Yeah, dabbled in business, wandered from thing to thing, is how he puts it. Not exactly the typical missionary background.
So how did he get involved in this work?
He says his dad basically roped him into helping with writing and curriculum for City Team.
Why him?
Because, as Paul jokes, he could write, knew the subject matter, and was relatively cheap labor. Not a very glamorous recruitment.
Huh. Okay, but here's a key thing in Paul's story, right? He actually tried these ideas out himself.
Yes. Crucial point. He experimented with the ideas and concepts Dad and I talk about in this book, but he did it in his own life.
His real world, as he calls it, with a regular job, marriage, kids, hobbies, church involvement, not out on some remote mission field.
Exactly. He wasn't living his dad's life. And the big question was, would these principles work in that kind of, normal context?
And the result?
He says, they did. They worked. That personal experimentation seems vital. It proved, at least to him, that these ideas weren't just for pioneers.
And that discovery led to his own sense of calling.
It did. He felt God clearly called me to make disciples and develop disciple makers and disciple-making teams worldwide.
So he joined City Team officially.
Yep, got hired, traveled a ton, more than 185,000 miles training people, using Skype and cell phones when he couldn't be there physically.
And his training helped others find these persons of peace and start discovery groups. We should probably clarify those terms.
Good point. Based on how the sources use them, a person of peace is basically someone God has already prepared in a community. Someone who's receptive, open, and might be willing to gather others. They're like the initial point of contact.
Okay, a receptive starting point. And discovery groups.
Those seem to be the core engine of multiplication. Simple groups, often hosted by that person of peace. They get together, read a Bible story, talk about what it says about God and people.
Okay.
Then they discuss how they can actually obey what they just read, and importantly, who they're going to share that same story with before they meet again.
So it's very focused on direct Bible engagement, obedience, and immediate sharing, not relying on a trained expert leading everything.
That seems to be the idea. Simple, reproducible, scripture-focused. So Paul was training people globally to facilitate this kind of process.
Got it. And his work back in Portland, running that recovery center, sounds like it really blended meeting basic needs with this DMM stuff.
Absolutely. He talks about providing food, 72,000 meals a year, showers, clothes, a place to sleep for 84 people per night.
Basic survival needs.
Right. While also catalyzing these disciple-making movements right there in the Pacific Northwest among that population. It shows they see these principles working even in really tough, demanding settings.
It's interesting, too, how they point out their personality differences. David the thinker, extreme introvert, football player. Paul the feeler, extreme extrovert, competitive singer.
Yeah, very different guys. But they emphasize that despite all the differences in background and personality,
they're united by one burning question.
Exactly. That seems to be the real heart of why they wrote the book.
And that question is, how do we help the millions of lost people who will never step foot inside the doors of existing churches fall in love with Jesus?
They talk about mourning over people disconnected from church and how hard it is for those people to fit into the existing Christian culture.
So that shared struggle, that ache to reach people who are completely outside the usual channels, that's the driving force.
That's what it sounds like. It fuels their search for these different, maybe countercultural patterns they found in Scripture and through all this experimentation.
So Paul's story really adds that layer of practicality. It shows these ideas aren't just for the super missionary, but can be tested and work in everyday life, even integrated with meeting profound physical needs. His experimentation seems key.
It definitely broadens the picture beyond just the initial dramatic story from India, makes it feel potentially more accessible, maybe.
Okay, so we followed this journey from just overwhelming despair in a place called the Graveyard of Missions
Right.
to this explosive multi-continental growth. We've seen David's path wrestling principles from Scripture in crisis, and Paul's path testing them out in his regular life.
And that shared passion driving them both.
Yeah.
How to reach people who are just completely outside the usual ways of doing things.
So, reflecting on all this from the sources, what does it mean for you, the listener? What are the main takeaways here?
Well, based only on what these endorsements and the introduction tell us, a few things stand out. First, the idea that exponential growth is actually possible, even in places that seem totally stuck.
But it might require different patterns.
Right. Patterns the authors claim are biblical, rather than just sticking to traditional institutional methods we're used to.
And the sources really hammer home that struggle and failure aren't necessarily signs you're doing it wrong. David's tough initial years, Paul's earlier unsuccessful attempt. It seems like learning through difficulty is part of the deal.
Yeah, it's integrated, not an exception. The story also highlights finding unexpected people, like that woman who wrote the letter or these persons of peace. God might use people you wouldn't initially pick.
Keep your eyes open for who God is preparing.
Seems to be the message. And the adaptability is striking, isn't it? Rural India, African nations, homeless shelters in the U.S., family networks in Latin America. The core ideas seem to transfer across vastly different contexts.
Which suggests it's more about principles than rigid methods.
Perhaps. And that core question the authors keep coming back to, how do we reach people totally disconnected from our institutions? It's presented as a vital challenge.
Implying maybe we need to fundamentally rethink how discipleship happens. Move it outside the walls.
Into everyday life, through things like these simple reproducible discovery groups, and finding those persons of peace. That's the picture they paint.
And finally, the book itself. It's positioned not as just theory, but as a practical guide from their own experience, inviting you into an adventure.
Right, so taken together, the sources suggest that major impact might not come from bigger budgets or more complex programs.
But from rediscovering simple biblical patterns.
Applied persistently, even through struggle, often by ordinary, unexpected people in everyday places. That's the essence of the story they tell.
So we've traced the story from David Watson's crisis and breakthrough, the global expansion, Paul Watson's validation in a different context, all driven by this deep desire to reach the unreached, leading to results that, frankly, sound astonishing.
The sources definitely paint a picture of transformation, coming from questioning the status quo, going back to what they see as foundational scriptural patterns, and sticking with it even when it's really hard.
So thinking about that central question, reaching people outside our usual structures and the incredible growth they describe after shifting their approach, maybe the final thought for you is this. What assumptions might you need to question about how real change or growth happens, whether it's in your own life, your work, or the communities you care about?
It's a provocative question raised by the sources. They certainly suggest that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come when we're willing to look at counterintuitive patterns found in unexpected places and have the grit to see them through.